I'm I have to apologize for what I'm wearing. I'm still waiting for my suitcase to come. I'm overseas. Mir Hashem. Okay. The last thing we learned about was Rabbi Yehuda said the name of Rabbi Yehuda said the name of Rabbi Yechanan. We're talking about Yain Nesach, that is bottle. And he said, we know that Yain Nesach, if it's min b'minay, wine and wine, then it never becomes bottle, never becomes diluted. By Yain Nesach, we're strict, like Chametz on Pesach. But if it was wine and water, so it's a min be'ena minay, then it's bottle b'shishim, like any other case of bittul. Then we introduced an idea that what happens if you have wine nesach mixing with wine that is mutter, and then you also have water. Now, the water is not sufficient water to be 60 times more than the aggregate of the yayin nesach with the kosher wine. But if you only focus, if you isolate the yayin nesach from the kosher wine, there's sufficient water there to be shishim, multiple shishim of that. So we had the concept, we imagined that the yayin heter eino does not exist. So all you have now is the yayin nesach versus the water, and the water cancels out or dilutes the wine, and it nullifies it completely. That was the concept introduced, and now the Gemara is going to tell us there's actually a little bit of machlekes in Chizkiah Rabbi Yechon. Chizkiah was Rabbi Yechon's Rebbe. The bottom of the page of Ayin Gimel Amud Aleph, this is Shabbos' Gemara. It says the Gemara Itma, we learned Yayin Neser Shenafal LeBoyer. So what happens is you have a boyer of regular wine, kosher wine, and then Yayin Neser fell into that boyer, even Nafal Sham Kitna Shemayim, and so too fell in the boyer a jug of water. Amar Chizkiah said, this is how we can learn the conclusion of the Gemara, that higdili be'isa. First you had the water and you had the kosher wine. So there was no reason for the water to nullify the wine. There was no problems there. And then what fell in higdili be'isa, what raised the level of the water and the wine there is the yayin nesach, the isadika wine came in. Then it is asa. You know why? Because the yayin nesach joins forces with the yayin, which is permitted, and together they reinforce each other. Min b'minah, it becomes stronger, and the water is insufficient to mevatel both together. However, if it delay behete, if first it was yayin nesach and the water canceled out the yayin nesach, and then you added more kosher wine, we don't say, oh, the two wine merges together, now you no longer have sufficient water to mevatel it. Then we say the bittul happened, it remains bottled. Mutter. That's what Chizkiah said. Rabbi Yechanan says, all right, Come to Rabbi Yechanan says, I don't care which came first, which came second. Rabbi Yechanan says, Rabbi Yechanan said that even if the second thing you put in was the Isser, it's still mutter. We don't say that because we do say that the water, that the yayin heter is as if it's non-existent. Kila einoi. All you have in this pit, in the cistern now, is this yayin nesach, and you have water, and therefore the water is 60 times as much as the yayin nesach. It dilutes it. Now the Gemara thinks, Rabbi Yirmiyah thinks that the basis of the argument of Chizkiah Rabbi Yechon had nothing to do with what I just told you, but actually has to do with another Gemara we had a while ago. And that is the concept of zeh v'zeh goyrem. If we had yeast of truma together with yeast of chulin, and each one on their own could not have made the bread rise. And it's only the two together function together. What happens? Do we say it's considered bread of truma and therefore only a kohen can eat it, or do we say no, because there's also heter involved? And they want to say the same thing applies here. This is how it goes. Let us say the argue the same argument of Rabbi and the Rabbanan. That now, what am I talking about? Which particular argument? The argument is as follows. So, if you have yeast of chulin, v'shel truma and truma should not return to dough. Neither of them had sufficient yeast there to turn it into bread. Then it started for v'chim, so that only by the combination of the two were you able to help the bread, rise. It became 11. Is Rabbi Lezer says achar aniba. You always look what came second. If the chulin came second, then it's chulin, and if the truma came second, then it's truma. So same thing here. Chizkiah saying the same thing. Whichever came last, the kosher wine or the treifa wine. And the Chachamim say, I don't care. It's not forbidden because since it's zev gorim, you have heter mixed with the iser. Unless you have what sufficient to make it chametz on its own, the truma. Same thing over here. They say, I don't care if the yain nesa came in first, the yain came in second. It makes absolutely no difference. But the din is that it's mutter. Because you need that the water should be able to cancel the yain nesa together with other. We imagine that the yain het is not here, and the water cancels out the yain nesa. The Gemara of Tizbra, let's say, how can that be the machlekes? When is this argument of Rabbi? When does Rabbi Lezer say you look at what's last? Elish Kodma says Isa, you remove the Isa and then you put in the Trum. But in our case of it, that's not what happened. Avo loy Kodma Vasil Isa, he did not remove the Isa, then Asa. Then Rabbi Lezer holds it's Asa. Rabbi Lezer holds that it's Asa. I don't care which came first, which came second. If you did not remove the Isa, it is still Asa because he holds Zebedee going as Asa. And the Chacham hold, I don't care which came first, which came second, it's always mutter. So therefore, Chizkiah doesn't come out like either one, if the way you understood is correct. Chizkiah, the Amma, come on, who does he follow? Because according to Chizkiah, depends which came in last, even though the original, the other one is still sitting there. Doesn't follow anybody. Ella Hoch, you know what we're talking about here? They're arguing the Royin Kemifgir. Do we imagine that the heter is no longer the wine? That's mutter is non-existent. The Chizkiah, let's say, he doesn't believe in Royin. And therefore, he said that if the tray for wine came in last, the tray for wine joins with the kosher wine, and therefore the water is not insufficient to nullify it. He doesn't believe in the concept of royal. Imagine the water that the yain heter is not there. And Rabbi Yochanan Islay says the Gemara, Rabbi Yochanan does Rabbi Yochanan actually really hold of the concept of royal? What do you mean? Does he hold the concept of royal? Let me ask a question. Rabbi Yochanan once asked Rabbi Yochanan the following question: Shnei says you have two cups. Echad shel chulin and echad shel truma. You have two cups. One is of chulin and one is of truma. Umazgan, and you put water in there. You mix with water. The even so now you mix them all together. You have three things now. You have wine of truma. You have wine of chulin, which is min b'minoi, and then you have water of chulin, which is it's an einaminoi. And the even they mix them all together. Mahu, what should the din be? Now the din should be straightforward. We imagine that the chulin of tar is non-existent. So you have the water versus the wine of truma, and that's it. And if there's enough water there, it's a vatlet. What's this question? And he didn't resolve it this way at all. He didn't approach it with this royin as if it's non-existent. So the Gemara, you're right. But you cut the Pashla. In the beginning, he didn't have the Svara either. It was a side Pashla. But later on, he changed his mind and decided to believe in this Roy. And base case is Echad Shlosh Truma, Mazgan, you mix diluted water, Roy, and it's a hetikile. And we look at the wine of Chulin as if it's non-existent. All you have left now is wine of Truma and a bunch of water. And Ki'ilu Eino, as if it's non-existent. Vashar, Ma'im, Rabim, Olam, Vat Moshe. You have enough water there. It's mevaklet. So we see that what? That Rabbi Yochanan actually changed his mind and he believes in this concept. Then the Mishnah said, this is the rule. Min b'minoi. If you have wine mixing up with wine, yain nesach with kosher wine, is b'mashu. The slightest amount is forbidden. Or shalai b'minoi. But if it's a different, let's say, wine in water, then b'nois and tam. If you can taste it or not taste it. So the general rule is shishim, but also if you can taste it and if you dilute it less than that, then you know for a fact, then it's all right. Rabbi Shmuel and both say that both. Now we have a big argument between Rabbi Shmuel and Halacha and the Shlok Rabbi Yechon. And the general rule is whenever you have a Shlok Rabbi Yechon arguing with Rabbi Shmuel, the Halacha is like a Shlok Rabbi Yechon. So Rabbi Shmuel, they both say Kol Isudin should be Torah. All the Isudin in the Torah. So it depends. B'minon b'mashu. If it's min b'minon, it's a mashu. Shaloi b'minon b'neisatam. They say that min b'minoi, they hold like Rabbi Yehuda that says that min b'minoi is also even a mashu. And we're looking more chulin more. What's the basis for that? Even we look for dama soya, dama pori, the blood of the soya, the blood of the pori when it comes on Yom Kippur, the two bloods mix together, and you spray it together and so on. They not battle each other. They reinforce each other. That's the logic behind it. So min b'minoi is not bottle at all. If you have the yain nesa mixed with kosher wine, it's not bottle at all. But not just wine. All these sudin in the potato. That's the point. All these sudin in the potato. Treifa meat and fats of treifa meat and the fats of kosher meat, the same thing. However, shaloi b'minan b'noistam. But if it's, let's say, treifa fats and meat or milk and meat, then it's bottle b'shishim. And when the Mishnah says Zehakla, why is Mishnah repeated when he already told you in the beginning it's Asa Mashu? And when it says Zehakla, Lasuye to include. My Lasuye, what's it coming to include? What's the rule that Min is Asa, not just Yayin Esech and Chametz and Pesach, but Kol Yisur Shabbatayah. All the Yisur in the Torah is Asa, what do you call it? The Mashu. I think what it says here, that's the view of Rabbi Shmuel. However, they hold that in all the certain Torah, it's always batal b'shishim. Exception is tevel and yayin nesach. We'll see why tevel. Tevel is when you have your teruah ready and you haven't given yet the truma or the ma'aser, you haven't done any of that, and that also and the chay mitzvah and that if you got it in machlekes, if you didn't give the ma'aser you chay mitzvah, but definitely you chay mitzvah didn't give the truma. So if a little bit of the tevel got mixed up with something else, it's not bottle at all. Is b'minan b'mashu shalei b'minan b'naisatam. These two b'minan mashu, and if loy minan a separate species, it's bottle b'shishim. When the Mishnah says v'zeh klau, is referring to lasuye tevel. What's it coming to include? That not only yayin nesa but also tevel. According to Rabbi Yechon, is the only other thing that we say min b'minan. Tanya we learned kavos say the Rabbi Shmuel. Tanya we learned kavos Rabbi Yechon. Tanya Kavos said Rabbi Shmuel said the Brayse Kolish of the Torah b'minah b'mashu any is in the Torah any is b'minah is mashu and shloi minah is tam, and it's exactly like Rabbi Shmuel. Tanya Kavos said Rabbi Yechon Shlokish. We've learned another Brayse similar to Yechon Shlokish that Kolish of the Torah b'minah shloi minah tam. All these in the Torah, whether it's b'min, whether it's not b'min, b'nois and tam. Chutz mit-tevel, the yayin nesech, that the only exception of tevel yayin nesech, b'noisen, b'mina and b'mashu, that if it's the same species, the mashu, shloim mina b'noisen tam. And the Gemara wants to know why. B'shloim yayin nesech, yayin nesech, b'shul chumra d'avad yicham. Because the chumra d'avad Zarah. El tevel, my time, why should tevel be so stringent that even a mashu also? Says the Gemara, you know why? Gemara gives a novel explanation why. Because just like how do you remove the isser of tevel? All you need is a mashu. According to technically, Shmuel says chita achas b'teres is akedi. One wheat, kernel wheat, is sufficient to allow you to enable you to eat the entire farm. Wheat, just the entire crop. Wheat, the Chacham came along and said, it depends how generous you are, whether it's a 40th or a 50th or a 60th. You're very generous. A 40th average, Bainus is a 50th, and you're not. Those are all a 60th. But mehatoida, one chita. So since one chita can remove it, so too a mashu can ask it. The Amar Shmuel chita achep says okay. Tell him the brayse me amr tevel otzeh b'choshu b'minah. B'minah b'neisan tam. B'minah b'neisan tam. Toys already brings the Yerushalmi that gives another reason entirely. The Yerushalmi says the reason why tevel is not bottled is because we have another rule. It's called davar sheyesh lematir. Bebei and other places that davar sheyesh lematir, something which you can one day make it completely mutter. Then I fill it bottle. Why rely on the rules of pittul? Just go ahead, make it mutter. Like an egg that was laid on Yom Tov and got mixed up with 1,000 other eggs. We say all the eggs are forbidden. Wait till tomorrow, and so on and so forth, and that'll be mutter. So, in case you want to know why we need both reasons, the reason of the Yerushalmi that davar sheyesh lematir, and what do you call it? And the reason here because of So Tyson says interesting thing. If we only knew davar sheyesh lematir, yesh lematir means that you, let's say, an egg on Yom Tov, it happens by itself. But over here, you have to physically go ahead and give truma. What happens if the owner is not around? If the owner is not around, it's no longer davar sheyesh lematir. It's no longer able to become mutter because nobody else can do this in the place of the owner. And therefore, you would think because it involves a big expense and a big tirch, it's not really a davar sheyesh lematir, and it should be bottled. This will give another reason entirely because keteda kachesura that's never bottled. And if it would only be the reason of keteda kachesura, I would have thought, okay, truma makes sense. What about when the Levi has to give when you give Maisa to a Levi, the Levi in turn has to give truma from that Maisa, and there the Torah fixes an amount, 10%. So because the Torah fixes an amount 10%, so maybe that trumas Maisa is taka does not aser b'mashu. And here we're learning that all stages of tevel is considered what do you call it? Is aser b'mashu. So if ayin dalad is still doing more, we're going a little bit ahead. Says the Mishnah, Elu Asurin, the following things are Aser b'oisen b'chol shehu, and the Aser b'chol shehu. We're talking about over here is, we're talking about a liquid of wine, it's lach b'lach, I mixed up with kosher wine. Now we're talking about yavish b'yavish. dry things. You have a barrel of kosher wine, a barrel of treif wine, or a barrel of treif wine, mix with a whole bunch of barrels of kosher wine. What do we do in this case here? How do we treat all these other barrels? We don't know which is which. The general din by Yovish is we say chad b'trei bottle. One, all you need is a majority, and that's enough. When they all mix together, then we say you need to make sure you don't feel the taste of it anymore, and the standard rule is shishin. But when it comes to Yovish, it's chad b'trei. But there are certain cases where if it's two things, as Mer will explain, if it's aser bahana, if something that's forbidden to have an which is very strict, and it's a dover minion. The normal way of selling it is by counting, and not by, you don't just throw a bunch of apples in a bag and say, oh, by the pound or by the kilo. Each individual apple has no chashivas, but rather you sell it by the a dozen eggs. So for each egg is chashiv because it's 12 eggs. Each egg has value. Then it's so chashiv. Afilu be'elef loy bak. So this is what it says. Elu asud and following the asud ve'oisim b'choshu, and they would ask it even though it's one barrel out of 1,000. Yayin nesech, one barrel yayin nesech, and 1,000 others, you cannot drink from any of the barrels. Nor can you have anor from any of the barrels. But avodas kachavim avodah Zarah. You have a sculpture which is you worship the avodah Zarah, and there are many other sculptures. There's a bunch of other sculptures look exactly the same, but they were never used for avodah Zarah. And and we learned before that they would cut out the skin if it's exactly a round circle around where the heart is. They used to pull the heart, the living heart, pumping heart, right, and worship, throw to the avodah Zarah, worship it. Those and that skin, we say, and that leather, that hide is forbidden. And and straight on this animal that was sentenced to kill the person, so was sentenced to be stoned to the animal of Osabana. And then it says the egla arufa, and so too the egla, the calf that was dedicated to the corpse was found. We don't know whose it is, whose corpse it is. You have to bring an egla arufa. So that egla arufa is also osabano, and the tzipoide mitzayda, the pigeons of a mitzayra as well, that a mitzayra has to shech, which is asabano. The sar nozer, the hair of a nozer, which has to be placed under the carbon shlami that he brings, and that is asabano. And these are all examples of things that are asbano. El petach, and you have to redeem the firstborn donkey with sheep, and as long as you didn't redeem it, it's asabano. U basa b'chalav, meat and milk got together. And basa b'chalav. Rashi brings here an interesting machlekes. He brings here from that some people want to say that basa b'chalav, we see from here, is asa b'mashu. That a drop of milk falls into a big pot is asa mashu. Rashi says definitely not. We're not talking about a drop of milk that falls into a pot because we're talking about davar shebeminion. And the little bit of milk that fell into the pot is not a davar shebeminion. It's not chashuv at all. But rather, we're talking about once it's been established that the milk fell in, it's less than 60 times of meat versus the milk. So now this piece of meat became a basa b'chalav. The steak now is not allowed to eat it because a piece of cheese fell in and melted in it. Then that mixes up with a whole bunch of other pieces of meat. They're all forbidden. And the Sir Hamishtalech on Yom Kippur, that goat that has to be sent off, which is Asur Bahana, and the Chulin Shenishchatu Ba'azara, and so to an animal that you chulin, that you shechted in the base of Midrash, you have no right to. Had the Elu Asudin, but they're all forbidden. If they got mixed up with a whole bunch of others, they're also, even though there's 1,000 times more of heta than Yisrael. So the first one wants to know, Tana, Micah Chashiv, all the examples that Tana gives, what's he counting on? Is he talking about Dover Shebeminion, if that's the focus here, anything which is Chashiv that's sold by the number, then Kachashiv, at least why doesn't he include pieces of Nevela? Okay, they're not Asabano, but that's not the issue. The main focus here is if it's something that's sold by the piece. So they're sold by the piece. And if he's counting things which are Asabano, then at least in Nam B'Cham is a Pesach. There was nothing to do with Davar Sheminion. Then why don't you count Cham as a Pesach, even though it's a small amount, that it's Asa. Because it's Asa Bana. Even if there's 1,000 pieces like it, it doesn't matter. It comes Asa. Hi Tana, this Mishnah, Tarti Isla, he holds you need both. You need Davar Sheminion and Isuriana. So you want to find, but there's still cases that he omitted. Gave so many examples, it could have included some others. For example, the least they want to include egoize perech, the walnuts, or the hazelnuts from a place called perech, which are very distinguished, and they're sold by the number. And when you mine a button, the pomegranate is a button, the dovish of a minion, they have dovish of a minion, and if they happen to be urlo, klayakedim, the isuriana, they're asvana. Why don't you include those? The Gemara says, Hatamle Hasa, it's already included. It says there in the Mishnah, Harol Arla, those which are in that Mishnah, which talks about these things, it says that that's what's suitable for Arla is Arla, Rola, it's already mentioned. Why should our Mishnah repeat something that's already mentioned? The least they want to include kikrish of balabais. Rabbi Kiva says he should also add that loaves of balabas are also sold. They're also what do you call? There's something with davar shivaminion, and regarding the Tam Pesach, it's also bahano. And the wine includes if you have matzah and you have tishul bais. Remember in those days matzah was up to a tefach thick, and you could have looked just like kikrish balabais. And from the out surface, you can't even tell which is Pesach, which is chametz, which is not chametz, which is matzah. So why do you include that? Davar shivaminion, one chametz got mixed with a bunch of other loaves that look similar, like waffle bread, thick waffle bread, and say that what that it's also davar shivaminion sold by the piece, and it's also bano. Why don't we include that? Says the Gemara. There's only one opinion that says you include bread of albas. Man shamed. Who said that Rabbi Kiva? Who says man shamed the Isla? Who's the one who says that? That is Rabbi Kiva and Hotanule. Rabbi Kiva clearly says already. Rabbi Kiva says over there. Rabbi Kiva adds to the rules of davar shivaminion. Av kikr shabalabais. Why should repeat again? Then the Mishnah concludes that elu, these are usr and usr b'choshu. Why does the Mishnah repeat itself? We already said that. What's it coming to negate? Lemut imai, what's it coming to negate? Lemut exclude davar shebeminyan v'lavi sudena. If something is only a davar shebeminyan, but it's not usr b'ana, or inami lemut yisudena, something which is usr b'ana, but it's not a davar shebeminyan, they're not included, and they're bottled like normal case of the bittul of yavish was 2 against 1. And the next Mishnah, which goes to the bottom of the page, Yayin, the Gemara concluded, Yayin Nesach Shenafal Abayis, wine. We already had this before. If Yayin Nesach, not kosher wine, fell into a pit, Kule Asabana, it's totally forbidden to have enough. Rav Shimon ben Gamliel says, Yimacher Kule La'edigacham, you can sell the entire contents to a goy, Chutz Midmei Yayin Nesach. You know how much a jug of Yayin Nesach, and you know how much you have in total, so you deduct that value of that jug, throw that water away, that money in Yam Melech, and you can enjoy, have hano, drink it, but you can have enough from the rest of the money that you sold the wine for. But when is it we already had before? Only by chavis, one barrel mixed up with another barrel. So there's 100 barrels. Then one of the barrels is yayin nesech. You don't know which one. So then he says you can sell the entire 100 barrels, and the value, 100th of it, you throw away. And the rest you can keep. But the wine physically mixed up, the kosher wine, the non-kosher wine, you cannot sell the entire content and say I'm selling it minus the amount of that tray for wine. Can't do that. It's all mixed, becomes one big issa. Definitely not drinking. We're talking about having a no. Shmuel said, I feel yain behind. Even the guy mixed up. If you know how much yain nesach fell in, just deduct that amount, and you can enjoy the rest of the money. They all say that even wine mixed with wine. I feel yain. All of them said that, but the same Rav Nachman said, however, even though you have so many opinions that are lenient, halacha l'maisa, you know what the final ruling is? Yayin nesach, yayin b'yayin aser. That yayin nesach, even if it's just mixed up with wine, if it's mixed up with wine, aser, you cannot sell it minus and deduct that amount. Or b'chavid mutter, but if the barrel, it is permitted. Why? That's by yayin nesach. If it's real yayin nesach, then we aser by yayin b'yayin would be very strict. Chavis will lenient, deduct the amount of a chavis. Or the stam yayin, if it's not yayin nesach, just stam yayin, we have a rule: if a guy touches it, already becomes aser. Then afilu yayin b'yayin mutter. Even the wine got mixed up, we are lenient, just deduct that amount, and it is mutter. We're not so strict. Okay, we'll stop here, and we'll continue next time doing Sunday's Gemara. Have a good day.